This morning we're going to be continuing in Exodus, but we're going to be moving forward in the story quite a bit into Exodus chapter 16. So if you have your Bibles, if you want to go ahead and begin turning there, as you do that, one of the things we are going to be doing these weeks as we work through the Old Testament this fall is we're going to play a little bit of catch up, kind of where we went from the story last week to how we got where we are today. But I do want to say this because I want you to kind of to be aware of it. A couple weeks ago in staff meeting, John Murphy asked a great question. He didn't know I was going to call him out today, but he asked a great question, which was why these particular stories this year as we go through the narrative lectionary? And it's a great question, and the answer to that is part of what we are doing as we go through, and this year will be in John's Gospel when we get to the first of the year. But the stories in the Old Testament are stories that they choose that correspond with some of the stories that we'll see in the Gospels. And so today's story you will see, and as Sharon has already read for us, are corresponding to John chapter 6, talking about the bread in the wilderness, talking about the manna. So it kind of prepares ourselves as we move into those verses, as we move into those statements later on. We're not going to be directly in John chapter 6 coming up, but we are going to be kind of talking about some of those I am statements. So just kind of to get your brain going and thinking of how the Bible completes this much larger story. So with that, let's talk through kind of where we were last week. We were at the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3. This week we have jumped all the way up to Exodus chapter 16, and so we've missed some very significant stories in Exodus, and so I just want you to be aware of those stories so you'll kind of know the things that we have jumped over. After the burning bush, Moses returns to Egypt. There he confronts Pharaoh, and in the confrontation of Pharaoh, he asks that the people be let go. Pharaoh's like, this is my workforce. Absolutely not. And so then we have the story of the 10 plagues that culminates with the people being released at the end of the 10th plague, or during the 10th plague. As the people are released, we'll look at this story just briefly today. They get to the Red Sea. God parts the waters. Then right after the Red Sea, we have the bitter water made sweet. And then we get to chapter 16. And so this is where we pick up the story today. So I want to go ahead and let's look at our passage. We will read through it, and then we are going to come back and kind of pick up some other little pieces as we kind of go through it. So chapter 16, and we're going to just read through this story. It says, the entire Israelite community departed from Elim and came to the wilderness of Sinai, or Sin. There's no pun intended there, but it kind of works. But the wilderness of Sinai, or the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. On the 15th day of the second month after they had left the land of Egypt, the entire Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by pots of meat and ate all the bread we wanted. Instead, you brought us into this wilderness to make the whole assembly die of hunger. The Lord said to Moses, I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you. The people are going to go out each day and gather enough for that day. This way, I will test them to see whether or not they follow my instructions. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather on other days. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, this evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In the morning you will see the Lord's glory, because he has heard your complaints about him. For who are we that you would complain about us? Moses continued, the Lord will give you meat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning. For he has heard the complaints that you are raising against him. Who are we? Your complaints are not against us, but against the Lord. Then Moses told Aaron, say to the entire Israelite community, come before the Lord, for he has heard your complaints. As Aaron was speaking to the entire Israelite community, they turned towards the wilderness. And there was a cloud in the Lord's glory appeared. The Lord spoke to Moses, I have heard the complaints of the Israelites. Tell them at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will eat bread until they are full. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. So at the evening, quail came and covered the camp. In the morning, there was a layer of dew all around the camp. The layer of dew evaporated, and there were fine flakes on the desert surface, as fine as the frost of the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they asked one another, what is it? Because they didn't know what it was. Moses told them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord commanded. Gather as much of it for each person needs to eat. You may take 2 quarts per individual according to the number of people each of you has in his tent. So the Israelites did this. Some gathered a lot, some a little. When they measured it by quarts, the person who gathered a lot had no surplus. The person who gathered a little had no shortage. Each gathered as much as he needed to eat. So here we have this story, and it's the story of manna and quail. But the people have been in the wilderness now for about 6 weeks. And the people are complaining. This is something we're going to see that happens regularly, but verse 2 and 3 has some things that I want you to see as we kind of walk through this. The first part of this is that it says the entire Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. This is not their first time to complain. Okay, the people have done this multiple times. Back in chapter 14, and these aren't up on the screen, but back in chapter 14, if you look at verse 11, it says to us there, they said to Moses, this is once they get to the Red Sea, they said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? God then parts the waters, this incredible miracle, but it doesn't take very long, just the very next chapter after God has done this, that we begin to complain again. Chapter 15, verse 24, the people grumbled to Moses, what are we going to drink? And this also isn't the last time they're going to complain, because by chapter 17, they're already complaining again. This is a cycle of complaint. It's a cycle that the people have been caught in and the people have been stuck in. The entire Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. They're complaining. So what are they complaining about? Well, first part is when we sat by pots of meat and ate all the bread we wanted. When we were in Egypt, we had everything great. But here's the problem, and y'all know the problem. This is a very kind of reductionist view of their history. They were slaves. They were slaves in Egypt. They woke up in the morning and they worked until they went to sleep. And they woke up in the morning and they worked until they went to sleep. And they did this year after year, generation after generation. The people multiplied. Remember the story? We are coming out of a story of Moses' generation of the little boys being killed. But oh, wouldn't it be great if we could just go back to that? They've taken this very narrow view of their history. Now, I understand. We look back at things, and things are always wonderful. Things are always great when we look back at them, aren't they? Yesterday, I got in the car. I went and ran in the morning. I get in the car, and for some reason, the XM radio was on the 70 station. I have the 70s and the 80s and the 90 station. It was on the 70 station. And I heard a voice on the radio. And when I heard that voice, I was a little kid laying in my bedroom, brown carpet. I had a silver tape recorder, and I'd have a radio. And I did this every Sunday afternoon. Every Sunday afternoon, I would lay in the floor, and I would get the Nashville paper, the Tennessean, and I would go to the entertainment section, and I would look at the top 10 songs. This is... Some of you don't remember these days, or some of you never knew these days existed. This is how you got music when I was a kid. You had your tape recorder, you look at the top 10 songs and decide which of those you wanted to have on your tape, and then you would lay there, and I'd lay on the floor with my tape recorder and the radio ready to hit record when that song came on. Because in the afternoons, Sunday afternoon on Y107, Casey Kasem came on. Yesterday, I got in my car, and it was not way before me, a few years before me, but it was the week of the end of September, beginning of October of 1973, Casey Kasem's Top 40. And I heard that voice, and I was back. I was back, not 1973, that was before me, but I was back in the early 80s in my bedroom. Those were great days. Hearing Casey Kasem's voice brings back all of this flood of what it was to be a little kid. But those aren't the days that we live in today. Today is God is doing something today. And the people kind of found this way of looking back at all of the things. And so they look back and have this very kind of rosy view of what it was to be slaves in Egypt. And they said, we had all we wanted to eat. We had everything we needed there. We had everything we wanted. And instead, Moses and Aaron, you brought us into this wilderness to make this whole assembly die of hunger. It's a little dramatic. We're all going to die because of what you have done. Now, what I want to do this morning is I'm going to break this passage into kind of three pieces, and I have 3 points to go with each one of the pieces, and then I'll pull it all together. Okay? So this is kind of the end of that first piece. What I want you to see is this. The people were relying on Moses and Aaron. The people were relying on Moses and Aaron. The error in this part, or this point of the story, is that they were relying on the wrong person. They should be relying on God, on Yahweh. They should be relying on the voice that came from the bush last week. That there, as was said to Moses, who do I say that I go? And remember last week, what did we say it was? Yod, Hav, Vav, He. I am. I will be. I am the past. I am the present. I am the future. I am everything in this world. I am everything in your life. The people didn't hear the message. They lost sight of who God was. And they were relying on Moses and Aaron instead of relying on God. So that's the first thing I want you to see. The next thing, if we kind of move through the passage, verses 4 and 5 says, Then the Lord said to Moses, I'm going to rain bread from heaven for you. The people are going out each day and gather enough for that day. This way, I will test them to see whether or not they follow my instructions. The first part, who's doing the action here? Who's making it rain bread from heaven? God. It's not a trick question. God is the one doing the action. But the other piece of this that we kind of have hindsight so we can see all of this. Why in the world the people are to go out each day, gather enough for that day. Then on the 6th day, they will prepare what they bring in, but it will be twice as much as they gather on the other days. Why? Because the Sabbath, right? We all know that. We're in Exodus chapter 16, aren't we? When do we get the 10 Commandments? Exodus chapter 20. Now, we're going to know by the end of the passage, God's going to tell us about the Sabbath by the end of this chapter. But at this point, the people don't know why they're going to do this. They don't know why they're going to get extra. They don't know why they're going to do all of this extra work. They don't know why. So here's my next piece. Will you trust God when you don't know the why? Will you trust God when you don't know why? Last week, we talked about the name of God. We talked about the importance of understanding that God is the God of the past, that God is the God of the present, that God is the God of the future. But for that future, am I going to trust God when I don't know what the future holds? Am I going to trust Him to be the next piece? Am I going to listen to a God who says, I am? I am all you need. I am your provision. I am your life. It's easy to say that in the present, but do we do it looking to the future? Are we willing to trust God when we don't know what's going to come? And here's the last thing in this little passage. Verse 8, Moses continued, "The Lord will give you meat to eat this evening and all the bread you want in the morning, for he has heard the complaints that you are raising against him." And then here's the little question. Who are we? Now, I love this question, and it's asked twice in this passage. What Moses and Aaron are saying is, you're upset with God, but you're taking it out on us. Who are we for you to be mad at us? It's God that you're mad at. But I think the question is a little bit more than that. I think the question also points back to the people. You're complaining against Moses and Aaron. But also, who are you? Are you a people who look to Moses and Aaron to be the one that provides for you? Or are you someone who is looking to a God? Remember, you were slaves in Egypt. Remember, you were hungry. Remember, you were lost. Remember, you were confused. Remember, you're looking for a God who is the one who does the action. But they aren't looking to God. They're looking to Moses and Aaron. The question isn't who is Moses and Aaron. The question isn't God. The question is who are we as God's people? Who are we looking to be the one who provides for us? So the last question, or the last little statement before I pull it all together, how often do we lose sight of who we are in the light of our complaints? If I opened it up for us to just say, hey, what do we want to complain about? What are some things in life we want to complain about? We could all come up with a pretty good list. I know I could. Do those complaints define who I am? Or am I defined by a God who says, I provide? A God who says, I am here. Let's look at one more verse, and then I'll start pulling it all together. When the Israelites saw it, they asked one another, when they saw the manna, what is it? Because they didn't know what it was. It is bread the Lord has given you to eat. So let's pull all of this together. First thing I want you to see is that manna is a gift. Our bread is a gift. But it's not about the manna. It's not about the quail. It's not about what we're going to eat for lunch. It's about a God. It's about a God who provides. One of the things that I say a lot of times before, if I do the prayer for offering, is a reminder, not just to y'all, but a reminder to myself, that if I have it, God has provided it. If there's something that I have, God has provided it. I didn't do anything. Now, we work hard. We do all this stuff, and we want to look at ourselves and say, well, we're the ones that have done it. That's not what Scripture tells us. Manna is a gift. And God is the gift giver. All that we have is a gift from God. That's the good, that's the bad, that's the worry, that's the frustration. Those are the complaints. But it's also the beauty of our lives. One of the lines that y'all have heard me say before, but it's an old line from Andy Stanley, and I don't quote Andy Stanley much, but this is a really good one. He made this statement years ago. He made the statement, you are willing to trust God with your eternal security, but you're not willing to trust God with your checkbook. Puts it in focus. I can trust God with eternity, but I don't know if I can trust God with October or November. So, manna is a gift and God is the gift giver. The second thing that I want you to be able to kind of take away from this is that at the heart of scarcity or the fear of scarcity lies a fundamental truth. It's what I've said. If God doesn't give it, then ultimately we don't have it. If God doesn't give it, ultimately we don't have it. And you could even kind of argue with that statement that says if God gives it, it's not really ours anyway, is it? The next piece is that we are a people who need to be reminded of God's miracles in the past. We are a people who need to be reminded of God's miracles in the past. Why? Because we have incredibly short attention spans. We forget stuff all the time. We forget the ways that God has worked in our lives. We forget the things that God has shown us. We forget the ways that God calls, the way that God speaks. We forget all of these things. And the question that is asked in this text is a question that we all need to hear. Who are we? What are the stories, what are the things in your past that have shaped you? What are the things in your life that have become an important part of your life? Where you can look back and say, this is a moment where I knew that God was acting. This is a moment where I knew God was present. I wasn't planning on telling this story. I was still debating in my head whether or not I was going to tell it because it's not in my sermon notes. But I'll tell it today because two dear friends, Don and Ann, are here. Don and Ann live in a somewhat divided headspace of being Alabama fans and Vanderbilt fans. And so yesterday they got to go celebrate, no matter who won, was a little bit of a celebration. I think Ann was more Alabama, but I'll tell that. I wasn't planning on telling the story, but since Don and Ann are here, and it fits right here, but when I think back about my own life and my own calling, if we were at Nashville First right now, I could walk you into the sanctuary and I could point exactly where I was sitting. Up in the balcony, top row, right by the door. There's a door right over there. You see it over there? Y'all know where it is? The door right up there in the top balcony. I was sitting right there. On the Sunday of our brand new pastor, his name was Stan Toller. We got out of Sunday school late because our Sunday school teacher always showed up late. We got out of Sunday school late, and my class, we sat right up there. I had only had one pastor in my life. His name was Millard Reed, and this was the first time there was a new pastor in my life at Nashville First. And I can remember so well seeing Dr. Toller get up and preach, and that was the day that I made a deal with God. This is what I said to God that day. God, I know you are calling me to ministry. I will do anything you want me to do, but I will never stand behind a pulpit and preach. I will never do it. Call me anything, call me a missionary, put me in Zimbabwe, where I don't care, but don't ever call me to preach. Now, God said, that's a great idea. I think I'm going to call you to preach. Thanks for bringing it up. But it's one of those moments in my life that I remember very well. And it's a moment in my life that I can look back and say, I know this was a moment that God spoke to me. And throughout those moments, and I could go through story after story, I could tell you another story that ties to our church, this kind of ties Nashville First and our church together a little bit in my life. That when I went to seminary, I had a professor say to me, he said, John, Trevecca will make you a minister, seminary will make you a pastor. And our very first Sunday back, it was at Christmas, so it had been Christmas of 1999. I walked in the back door, of the church that Sunday morning, and there was a man who sat right over there with his wife, super, just absolutely wonderful couple. And this little man got up and he walked over to me, and he shook my hand, and he uttered words to me that had never been uttered to me in my life. My first time home from seminary. He walked up to me and he said, "Good morning, Pastor." No one had ever called me pastor before. And that little guy, I say he was little, he wasn't little, but he's little to me. That little guy, I have to quit calling him little. His name was George Prevet. His brother, Calvin Prevet, was the first pastor of Gardendale Church of the Nazarene. Those are places in my life that I look back and say, here's where God has worked, and God has continued to work time and time and time. And I could go around this room and tell stories of how God has worked. The gift of ongoing provision reminds us that there is a God who provides. That there is a God who has been a part of our lives, that there is a God who speaks to us. These stories, the stories of the Bible, the stories of our lives, they're stories, but they're reminders of a God who has spoken and continues to speak. That every time we sit down together and we sit at a table and we pray a prayer because we want to hurry up and do it so we can all eat, it is a reminder to us of a God who provides. A God who says to us, if you have it, ultimately it's because I have given it to you. Today, as we close and as we come together, I would like to close as we normally do close. To be reminded today of a God who is with us. As John comes, we're going to close with one last song, and those of you that worship with us regularly kind of know the routine. If you would like to pray with a pastor, Pastor James will be right down here at this altar. He would love the opportunity to pray with you. This morning, if you would like to be anointed for healing for any reason, spiritual, emotional, physical, whatever that might be, I will be right down at this altar, and I'd love the opportunity to pray with you. But some of us might just need to find a place to be reminded. Reminded of a fundamental truth that if God doesn't give it, then ultimately we don't have it. To be reminded of an ongoing gift of provision is a reminder to us of a God that provides for us. We live in a world dominated by fear. We live in a world dominated by fear and dominated by the fear of scarcity. But we serve a God who provides. A God who reminds us, this is who I am, and because of that, this is who you are. May we celebrate knowing that there is a God who provides, a God who gives life, a God who in the midst of our fear is a God who is present. Let us stand today as we sing.